if we want our businesses to thrive in this new era, we're going to have to get on board and figure out how to use AI. And we're going to have to figure it out at a very practical level. And this isn't just applying to, you know, funded tech companies in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. This is every business everywhere is going to have to figure out AI. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I have a super guest on to talk about some really practical strategies and approaches to this. So we're going to talk about that next.
Welcome to The AI-Powered Business Leader. This is the show that helps business leaders excel in the rapidly evolving environment of AI integration and implementation. We go beyond the hype to provide practical solutions for real businesses. Whether you're facing challenges like developing a clear AI strategy, upskilling your workforce, or ensuring data privacy and compliance, we've got you covered. Here is your host, Alistair McDermott.
And today my guest is Eric Bai. Eric, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
So we were talking beforehand and in our pre-chat about some really practical things that we can do to approach this. And one of the things that you talked about, I thought was a really great way to kind of frame it and to think about it. So you talked about roles and workflow and tasks. Can you tell me a little bit about that, explain the concept and kind of, because that will help to frame the rest of our conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, one of the concerns about AI is it replacing jobs. But one of them, I guess, common ways to look at that is it's not going to replace jobs, it's going to transform them. So when you think about a job, you can break that job into a number of workflows and each workflow into a number of tasks. Now, AI can support, augment, assist, or automate aspects of tasks or workflows. But from a role perspective, you're not going to have AI coming in and just replacing that role. So when it comes to understanding where AI is going to fit into your business, it's a good place to start because it helps you break things down into kind of manageable chunks.
So how do we identify, like when you're talking with a business that needs to implement this, like where do you start? How do you start to figure that out?
There's two different angles that I tend to start. One is if I'm doing an assessment with a business, I have an AI opportunity assessment, helping them understand where it might fit into their business. That's me going into them, starting talking to their kind of leadership within the business, and then speaking with and doing surveys of the various roles within the business, understanding what are the common workflows that role does, what are their challenges, how is that workflow broken down into tasks. Because I've worked with teams from all different parts of most companies I've been with in the past, I've got a pretty good understanding of how those tasks break down. And then I can, based on my understanding of where their time is going, what their challenges are, and what kind of the key workflows and tasks are, I can start to work with them to help them understand where AI can kind of insert into those workflows to either improve efficiencies. But it's not just about efficiencies. It's also sometimes it can help increase the value that a workflow or task generates as an output.
How does it do that? I'm interested in increasing the value specifically, because that's not something people talk a lot about.
Yeah, so I guess if you think about, you've got any task has an input, which might be information that just sits in someone's head, or information from a customer, or information from a data set. And then it has an output, which could be content, it could be a decision, it could be a document or report for a customer. So for example, I've got one client that has a number of consultants that work to generate reports, and they want to make the report writing process kind of more efficient and just faster in general using AI. But one of the things that we looked at as well that I suggested was, well, do your customers, do you ever get feedback from your customers on the quality of the reports? Do you ever personalize them for the type of technical knowledge that they might have, or the role that they might have, or their objectives, or your commercial objectives? So instead of just using AI from an efficiency point of view we're looking at all the different ways that AI can improve the quality of the report, the readability of the report, as well as weave in some of those commercial objectives. These consultants aren't copywriters. No marketing team has time to go through and rewrite technical reports, and they often don't have the knowledge as well. So it's a small example, but it's one clear one on kind of different ways that AI can actually improve the value that an output is providing to an end customer in that situation.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so when I hear you talking about, tasks and workflows and roles, one thing I know that particularly in the SME, the small business, small medium business uh, kind of sector, there's a lot of fluidity about roles and workflows, and people don't have standard operating procedures or SOPs quite often, and having those does make life a lot easier when you are, just when you're operating in general, but when you're using AI, because you can start to look at those for opportunities. But for people who don't have that, like is that the first thing you do? Do you try and document what they're doing? How do you approach that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a lot easier if people have their SOPs documented, or their processes mapped. But like you said, it's not overly common in the SME space. So sometimes I'll do an initial mapping just so I make sure I understand that my assumptions are correct when it comes to feasibility and quoting. But then as part of that engagement, I will go in and help kind of document and map out those specific workflows, uh, either working with their teams internally because they might want to improve them anyways while they're at it, or just kind of going in myself and identifying all the different ways that it fits in. Because often as well, sometimes process optimization can get you further than AI as a first step. So I'm careful to make sure AI is not the silver bullet. If there's a ton of different opportunities on the table, it's worth working those in as well at the same time.
So then, do you think about this whole thing as kind of process optimization, which includes AI, but isn't necessarily like, is that like the overall offering that you're making here?
Um, I've probably not made it out loud before, but yeah, it's part of it.
Hmm.
Really, what we try and do rather than making it either like specifically process optimization or digital transformation or just getting AI into the business, it's defining what are the problems that they want to solve or what are the objectives that they're looking to achieve, and then looking at kind of a holistic approach for what's going to get them to those goals. Because I think you a lot of the time it's really easy to have a solution in search of a problem. So if you just go
Yeah.
in and say, where does AI fit into this? By definition, because they're trying to create something that's generally intelligent, it can fit in anywhere. It's identifying where it should fit in, where it's going to actually add value.
How do you prioritize then when you're looking at this? Like if you're a business leader and you're trying to figure out, okay, like where do we even start? We don't like the whole thing is unknown unknowns. We don't know what the capabilities are. It's a moving target anyway. It's continuously improving, and we don't really know where to start with this. Like how do you deal with that?
Um, on one side, I think it's good to start with a broader understanding of the business. That's one way that I like to work with businesses is going in and giving them kind of a snapshot. All right, based on all your most common workflows for each of your roles, here are all the places that you can think about where AI might fit in. I do a bit of try to quantify a bit on the amount of efficiency that AI could add at a task or workflow level, as well as the value add that it could add, and then the complexity that getting that value or efficiency might have. So that tends to give them a general picture of where AI fits in, kind of where those quick wins are, where the low hanging fruit is, or if they have different priorities because of specific challenges internally, or objectives or problems that they're facing, then kind of focus on those places. But that initial snapshot helps. Now, sometimes businesses prefer to kind of dip their toe in the water a little bit. So they might have some specific challenges or workflows that they want looking at. So sometimes, even if there might be other opportunities in the business, they want that proof of value first. So it might be a more targeted approach to kind of look at an individual team or an individual workflow or a specific problem or objective and say, all right, well, here are the ways that I can help or AI can help kind of help you achieve those specific things, and just ignoring kind of the rest of the business for that initial stage.
If a business is interested specifically quantifying the improvements, I assume that you have to benchmark where their existing pre-AI setup is, because you won't be able to give them a quantifiable metric on here's how your efficiency improved, or here's how productivity improved, if you don't know what it was before you started using these tools, right?
Yeah, definitely. I don't usually have time to go in depth and do time and motion on everything, but people generally have a decent idea in their head when you get down to the people actually doing the tasks or that own the workflows, how long different elements take. So we try and get a relatively accurate estimate so that following the implementation of any sort of changes, we can then kind of track how it's improved and where the challenges are. Because
Yeah.
often, especially if you don't have a standard operating procedure, um, the challenges that you're also introducing might be introducing best practice that might take a bit more time.
Yeah, it's like you could be introducing a lot of different types of changes simultaneously, and I could also imagine there being a bit of resistance to that.
Yeah, I mean, on the change management side, it's definitely tricky. Part of my background is doing kind of enterprise digital transformation, and you do need to make sure you're working closely with them. I try and make it as collaboratively as possible. I'm doing kind of workshops to introduce it and getting feedback, because it's all about helping the business use AI to leverage their own expertise. And I know that I'm not an expert in what they do for the most part. I'm an expert in helping them leverage AI to get the most out of it. So to get the most out of it, it really does need to be a collaborative approach, which does help break down some of that initial resistance and skepticism.
I'm interested in what you're seeing when you talk to businesses and you talk to people working in different roles in those businesses. I'm interested. Are you seeing much uptake at the moment? Because I know that Microsoft and LinkedIn had a survey where they surveyed 30, I think it was 31,000 people, and that they saw super high adoption, like around 75%. But like my feeling is that on the ground in a lot of businesses, there's a lot of businesses that aren't doing any of this at all. So I'm just wondering what your experience is on, like, are you seeing people already using AI when you go in the door?
I'm seeing them already using AI, but they're doing it very informally. They tend to be using personal or free accounts rather than it being company sponsored for the most part, which is a whole separate kind of risk. And I've frequently seen a lot of people that have given it a few tests, and found that it wasn't giving them what they needed, or because it's a chat, it's starting with a blank page, not knowing where to start. They do a few initial tests and don't find that it's adding a lot of value, or it's unable to solve a certain problem or help them with a certain workflow. So they kind of just give up on it a little bit. So part of a lot of my conversations are helping break through that skepticism, because people have tested it. They feel like they've found that it's not working for them. But a lot of that is just education and experimentation over a longer period of time. I found very little formal adoption within or plans within businesses. But that's also the types of businesses that I talk to and that come to me are those people that need help understanding where to start.
Yeah, and I think that it's a hard sell. Like my experience has been that when I'm talking to people who've had those bad experiences, like they don't want to hear that basically that's a user error. Like that's a lack of education or AI literacy. Like that's the real problem there. But usually that's what it is, because they haven't really they haven't really looked. They've started to experiment without trying to learn about it. And once you start to put real examples in front of them and show them how to use it, I found that adoption, it's much easier to get them across the line when they can see real world examples. So I guess and then the other thing that you mentioned is people using personal accounts. Like, just for the audience, like the big risk there is data privacy. Like if you're putting in transcripts of calls with clients, like your client information in there, um, you know, probably violating GDPR if you're in the EU or you have EU clients. And then the other one is losing access to IP. I think Samsung had a very famous case last year where they put some proprietary, confidential company information into ChatGPT, and they couldn't get it removed. So, is that the kind of issues that you're seeing? Is there anything I've missed there?
No, that's exactly the kind of issues. ChatGPT's recently released a new setting, so you can turn off training, but you're still under those consumer terms. You don't get the protections of like the Teams or enterprise plans or data security aspects of that. And it's not just, I guess, yeah, intellectual property, GDPR, huge concerns, not just for your own business, but if you work with client businesses, it'll be interesting when the next big models start to come out, if you can look up businesses and get a whole bunch of ideas on what their internal strategies were, because their whole teams are using ChatGPT to write them on a personal account for the last 2 years. So that'll be interesting. There's also big concerns on that side when it comes to like meeting notes apps. So if you're joining a meeting, they signed up for example, Otter AI, which once you sign up, it auto invites itself to all of your meetings. Everyone just approves it. If you're on a free plan, I don't think there's any privacy protections with something like that. So it's not only what you're using, but being aware of what people on the calls that you're on are using as well. It gets messy coming up with a policy that's simple and understandable for businesses and their employees, but is going to protect you.
I guess this is the really interesting thing about AI and figuring out the kind of lines of demarcation, because it's only truly valuable and useful when we give it access to all of this information. When we cede some level of privacy and say, okay, I'm going to let you access all my conversations that I have at work. That's when it becomes truly valuable, in my experience. I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, integrating that personal context is huge. I think one way to think about it is if you ask an employee to create a presentation for, say, a pitch, there's hundreds of thousands of words or tokens that are unsaid when you ask them to create that. They understand your relationship with the client, they understand the history, they're probably CC'd on a whole bunch of emails, they understood what's worked and what hasn't in the past. People put those similar requests into an AI without any thought about what they would normally expect the person to know, and then get disappointed with the results. And that integration across your work chat and your emails it's coming. It's not necessarily here yet, but it's definitely going to bring with it a whole bunch of risks. I think, and it's not only for the individual employee, but if you think about people being able to access all the company information, and from like transcripts to calls that they weren't on, maybe there's a lot of like banter and other types of conversations, but outside of the data security side, it's one of the reasons that I think a lot of people found Apple's pitch, I think last week or the week before, so appealing when it comes to how they were handling as much AI on device as possible, only sending what they have to the cloud. But yeah, giving it access to that personal context is going to be huge in unlocking more and more value as it learns more and more about you and your personal situation and your relationships with different people and your objectives and projects.
Yeah, I think that one of the issues that we're thinking about and talking about here is you talk about on-device models where they're processing, and it doesn't, none of your data actually leaves the device, supposedly. And then, we're talking about enterprise plans for some of the larger models like Google's Gemini or ChatGPT. And then there's the ability to run your own private instance, your own private server, which I think like some of the enterprise, like some of the larger organizations will be doing that, having their own install of these open source models like Llama 3 or some of these. I've actually installed some of those locally here on my own computer, just to test them and play with them. And it's interesting to see, because you can then put more of your own information and your own data in there. And that gets interesting it's I can't see organizations, businesses doing that unless they're really at the enterprise level, though, because it's too much infrastructure to try and maintain. What are you seeing?
Totally.
Because I think like the small, like the way I see it, the solopreneurs and very like tiny micro businesses, they're going to go with the commercial personal accounts and just use that. And then the enterprise folks, like the Fortune 500, they're going to be using these enterprise level plans. But there's going to be a lot of businesses in the middle somewhere who don't know which way to go. Like, should they be using the enterprise level and have their own private instance with that's trained up on their model? How do they get access to the true value of these systems, which is to have lots and lots of your business data in the model itself?
I think it's all about the business's risk profile. Each business has a different appetite for risk, a different level of sensitivity with the types of information that their business might kind of want to input into these models. I mean, OpenAI's like terms and security around their Teams plan versus their enterprise plan are actually quite similar. And the Teams plan isn't that much more expensive. Claude has pretty strong kind of commercial terms and conditions as well. So a lot of it also comes down to trust. How much do you actually trust the providers that they're going to be able to keep your data secure? So it's almost like with any software procurement. If you're putting a whole bunch of your data in it, how much do you trust their ability to keep it secure? One of the things that I do when I'm working with businesses, though, if that they are concerned about certain types of information, is making sure that they have approval on using AI for certain workflows, that if they deal with particularly sensitive subjects or topics, that they avoid putting that information in. Avoid putting any PII in at all. Don't just copy and paste whole email threads with your customers. While they say they're trying to remove that in training, I mean, my last name is Bai, so it would be difficult for them to identify that in all the training data and remove it effectively. So it's a case by case basis, really, on the sensitivity. I think we're going to continue to see it evolve. Right now, it's not ingesting all of your information; it's only putting in what you want to put in right now. But I think as we see kind of like Microsoft's Copilot mature, as we see kind of Google's Gemini enterprise plans mature, and they start to get a bit more predictive and kind of more proactively search out information and context behind the scenes, so you're not necessarily aware of what's going into the prompt, then you'll probably start to see a lot more difficult decisions being made. My prediction is, though, from a local model point of view, when you're wanting to work with the most performant models, we're going to keep seeing bigger and bigger models. So we might have a whole bunch of smaller actions working locally, but if you're doing kind of more challenging tasks that require a lot more reasoning, you're probably going to have to continue to go to the cloud. So it's finding those providers that you trust, that are able to help kind of achieve what you need to achieve.
And let's talk about the different providers then for a moment, because the way I see it at the moment, most businesses are, well, I think that ChatGPT has certainly, like, they got the jump on everybody. So they're the most well known. And then we have, Google with Gemini and Microsoft with Copilot and whatever, and the other issue with these models is they keep renaming them, which is really not helping, because
I still can't figure out which model of Google Gemini I have access to.
Yeah. I pay for Google Gemini and I pay for ChatGPT. Those are the two paid ones that I have. I also have access to Google's AI Studio, which is their next generation model, which is pretty cool because it's got a 1 million token window. So
Yes.
that means that you can put in like the equivalent of 3 or 4 different business books worth of data, which is big, because I have actually put in business books, my own and that of a friend of mine, where we got it to help us with checking the content, grammar, and structure, and kind of developmental editing and things like that. But these models, what I'm seeing at the moment is that if you use Office 365, then you're probably going to go with Microsoft's because it's built into all of the stuff that you do with your, if that's what you do use for email and office productivity. If you use G Suite or Google Workspace or whatever Google called that this week, if you use that Google system for email and everything, then you're probably going to go with Gemini because that's just the default. I'm wondering, are you seeing people use stuff outside of what what the default would be? Are you seeing people using different models in the same organization?
Yeah, I think at the moment everyone's just tends to be experimenting. I've seen a lot more limited testing of Gemini or kind of Microsoft suites. Uh, Microsoft had a big pitch, but I've not heard a lot of positive reviews come out of it. Google Gemini, I've got AI Enterprise, and my unpaid personal Google account has more AI functionality than that AI Enterprise at the moment. So everything's quite limited on that side. The challenge is when you're an enterprise too, changing between suites is really expensive and making a long-term commitment. So Copilot requires like a 12-month purchase upfront for a license, which is a little bit obscene. So we're starting to see more enterprise partnerships coming from like with OpenAI and their ChatGPT Enterprise. And I think my hypothesis, and I suspect this, just mostly based on vibes, is that we're going to see a lot more businesses kind of committing to those enterprise or those teams plans for now, continuing to test it because they know not only that will always be running the best model and have the newest features, but there's more control. When you're using Copilot, it does have that integration with your SharePoint that has your kind of Active Directory and your security rules set up. But how many businesses, especially SMEs, do you know that are really confident in how that's set up right now and have the time to go and rework it and check it all to make sure it's going to do what they want it to do? So it'll be really interesting to see how the next kind of 6 to 12 months plays out and how they start building AI into these kind of workplace platforms. Because I've been dying for some proper AI features in G Suite that I use at the moment. And I've almost never used anything that they have in there yet.
Yeah, I want to really, like, ultimately for me it's all going towards voice, and I want to be able to do that voice interaction. Find me the last email conversation with Eric and give me a summary of it and then start to draft a reply to him. That's what I want to be able to do with my email. I want to be able to do the same with my Asana projects. I want to be able to say, what's the status of this project? Who are we waiting for? Can you send an update to somebody saying such and such a task is complete? I want the system to just be able to interact with me like that. And I think that's where Apple is going a bit with what they're doing. But I think that even though they got such they were so far behind, I think that they've actually taken a step forward with, a step beyond maybe Microsoft and Google with the way that they've approached this. Because for me, that's the way. Like, it's all going to be about voice interaction and having those conversations like with our data, with some reasoning behind it. That's how I can see a lot of this working. What about you? What makes you what kind of features do you really want to see from this?
I'm looking for automation. A lot of the stuff you can do with Zapier to say, when I receive an email with this in it, I want you to go do this. And you have your CRM starting to plug into everything. But if I'm having a back and forth with the client, I want to continue to do that in my email, but have it update my CRM based on the context of that email or the transcript from a call, as well as maybe update the project plan based on those discussions, or suggest an update to a project plan. That sort of kind of doing those little admin tasks that always take a whole bunch of time. So I don't have to kind of pivot between all these different systems. Just let me live in one place and help me kind of keep all those other things up to date so I can get the most out of them rather than having to constantly kind of copy and paste and move things around. So we're seeing kind of the CRM and SaaS companies take a step ahead, build their integrations, but I think we'll start. It was a lot of that was in the Copilot pitch, but we're not there yet. So kind of being able to, whether it's text or asking it, look, every time I get an email with an invoice in it, put it in zero, and kind of keep track of all that. And I think those basic actions that it can take on my behalf is going to give me a lot of value personally. And I think looking at a lot of businesses as well, that's where you're going to see a huge unlock when it comes to, okay, like we've got an inbox that receives all our leads, for example. Before a salesperson looks at it, it'd be great if the AI went to that business's website, gave a breakdown of everything they did, kind of qualified and prioritized that lead, and then assigned it to the right person. It's stuff that I can do now using manual automations, but building those workflows in an environment that is a bit more user friendly, I think that's where we're going to see some huge gains. That kind of new user experience going beyond talking to it and asking to it. It's kind of the traditional digital transformation journey. Currently, it's really reactive. We're asking it to do something on our behalf, and it's going off and doing it. I'm looking forward to the kind of the proactive stage where it knows kind of what I want to do next. It knows some of the context, or it's able to at least proactively manage things that I tell it to once I tell it wants to do it. And then when we go into the predictive, hopefully in the next 1 to 2 years, where it will say, look, here's a new project going on. It's not in the project management system yet. Let's create a project, use the template, and crack on.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is going to be huge is those true automations. So where we can create an agent to do something for us. And I've played around a lot with agents recently, and I find like they're still at that very early stage of where you have to kind of hand create everything. Like I found myself installing Python, which is a programming language, on my computer so that I could create an agent, and then I found myself going to a website and trying to find a CSS selector, which is like the identifier for a label, to try and get this thing to work. So it's still super clunky, and only people who maybe have like a coding or software engineering background, I think, can really truly use these things properly at the moment. But at some point, somebody is going to fix that, and then we're going to be able to say, hey, for example, watch me upload my podcast audio and watch me do the whole workflow. And once that's done, then create that as a workflow so that you can then next time do that whole workflow of uploading my podcast and titling the episode and doing all that for me, because that's something, that I repeat for every podcast episode. It's an established workflow that I have. I'm looking forward to be able to offload that step, because it's not quite there yet, but it's getting there, right?
Yeah, we're getting there. When you have kind of those multi-step, it's really easy to experience a cascading failure, even at like a 95%, if it's a frequent task. But I think one of the things that I'm really looking forward to being wrapped around that agent is the user interface and the user experience, because failures will still happen, but the ability to kind of, the steps it's going to take to jump in and say, oh, that's the wrong step you're going to take. You want to do this action instead, or for it to say, oh, it failed here, rather than having to rerun it, kind of fix whatever it failed and then have it continue on. I think those user experiences and user interfaces are going to get really interesting with how we think about and how we interact with these things on a day-to-day basis. Will it be a lot more like keeping an eye on a few interns versus kind of just waiting for a black box to do whatever it's supposed to and not being sure where it failed?
So that technology of agents, which is basically giving it's giving AI power to do stuff on your device, like on your browser. Go for example, for me, for the podcast, it's go navigate to the podcast website, log in, and then click on the upload button, and then go find the file on my desktop and upload that MP3 file, that audio file. So it's actually able to interact with your device and do things. Like, that's the next level that we're talking about, apart from just being able to have a chat back and forth with us, like the large language models, the LLMs, like like ChatGPT and things. But those agents right now are really clunky to create. So that's what we're talking about here. Is it's so difficult to set them up right now, and I think that will change. But bringing it back to technologies that are currently available, um, we're talking about using Gemini and ChatGPT and Copilot, and the capabilities of these existing systems are incredible. What they can do, so like
Definitely.
they're stuff that we can implement right now, and and are using, and I think that when people are trained in their use and know how to use them properly, suddenly they realize, oh, the capabilities of this are far greater than I realized when I did my initial testing. And like that's something that both you and I have experienced.
Yeah, massively. I mean, as an entrepreneur, it's given me the ability to do multiple times what I'm able to accomplish, just using that chat interface. And all of the steps that a business needs to take advantage of AI in the future are those aren't going to go away. Understanding your workflows, understanding where it's going to fit. There's a ton of value you can get today, and all of that knowledge and all those skills around using the systems, about understanding where it fits into your business, those will just help give you your business a foundation too, so that as we get the next improvement and the next feature and the next improvement, you'll just be able to take advantage of them even faster, rather than kind of waiting and then starting from scratch 3 or 6 months from now because it's not perfect or it hallucinates here and there. There's a ton of value you can get today as long as you're careful about managing those risks and educating your team and giving them access to the safe and secure products that of your business and your legal department are comfortable with. Because there's there's tons of opportunity today, and I think some people would like to wait until they they see it as perfect, but it's just different technology that operates differently, which makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. Um, there were some tips that we were kind of sharing some ideas on our last call and today. One of the ones that you suggested was, for me, it was genius, because one of the issues with using these systems is sometimes when they write for you, the writing is very clearly AI generated. Like there's something about the language, and you suggested that I tell it not to use adjectives, and
Yeah.
that's such a simple tip, but asking it not to use adjectives in writing, like what's that going to do?
Also, just been massive for me. If you look at any of your writing, I went back and started looking at things I've been doing since before I started using that, and you notice that it peppers in adjectives everywhere it can to try and make itself sound smarter and more complex. When you remove those adjectives, suddenly you get a really concise, really clear, and easy to understand and far shorter description or explanation. If I want some adjectives, I might just ask it to use it sparingly, but that seems to remove a lot of those kind of AI vibes you get from a lot of AI generated text. You still, if you're doing something that you do all the time, you might want to use writing samples still, get it to copy that voice and that style and tone, but asking it to not use adjectives. And I think was it Bezos or was it Steve Jobs that told everyone to stop using adjectives in their business writing? But that was it's massively transformed the quality of output I get from these tools, and it's made them write in a far more concise way.
I love it, and I'm definitely going to do that. Um, are there any other piece of advice that you would have for somebody who is looking at their business and they're wondering where to start with this? Um, where's the first place to go? What should they try first?
Just try experimenting. Um, get on a couple of the different tools like Claude and ChatGPT, so you can see the differences. Make sure you've got your privacy settings on them, so you're not training the data, and start experimenting. Whether it's for work tasks like writing an email or writing a document or getting a recipe. I once gave it my all the ingredients I had in my house and asked for a recipe on something, seeing where it fails. So in that situation, it got some of the proportions wrong, but it did really really well, and I was able to understand far better in that context, kind of, oh, it fails around this type of math. So the
That's
first thing
a
is really
great,
just
yeah.
experimenting.
Like cooking and recipes is probably 30 to 40% of my entire AI usage right now because I use it all the time. You know, whether that's like how long should I cook this for, at what temperature, or I have this thing and I want to make, you know, can you suggest like 5 Mexican recipes using these ingredients, or you know, just lots of different kind of suggestions for different ways to do things. I find it so useful for that. And now I love cooking, and I have a lot of cookbooks, but I find this is really useful for that because it just it gives you the specific answer that you're looking for. So that's definitely a great kind of like test case, a great place to start if you're not sure. The other thing that I would suggest is if you're like me and you like talking and dictating, then install the app. Like both Claude and ChatGPT have apps that you can install. I'm sure the others have them coming out, or have them available now. But you can actually talk to it, and being able to have a conversation or just dictating your prompts, you can make them much longer. Like sometimes I'm dictating a prompt for 3-4 minutes, and what I'm doing is I'm giving it lots of background, lots of context, because the more context you give it to something, the more information it has to work with, the better the output's going to be. So those are some things that I do as well.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, when I take my dog out for a walk, I'll often have it just a like an hour long conversation with ChatGPT, and I'll say, like, I want to learn about this topic and become more of an expert in it. If it's something I'm unfamiliar with, or I want to work through this business challenge, or I want to get feedback on this, and I'll just have a kind of going back and forth. And by the end of the walk, I've been able to spend an hour talking to an expert on something that I would have had to troll like all the internet for days to get those answers in that type of way. So it's a great way to use the tool and understand kind of how it responds.
Awesome, love it. Eric, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Um, I've got a website, erictronai.com, or I'm on LinkedIn. I do most of my content sharing on LinkedIn. You can find me, Eric By. There's not too many of us. And yeah, just feel free to reach out. I do introduction to AI and discovery sessions for free for an kind of initial kind of get people understanding what it's about, why they should care, and what they can do next.
Awesome, I love it. And I will have links to your LinkedIn and your website in the show notes for the episode. Eric
That's
Bai,
great.
thank you so much for being with us
Thanks,
today.
Alistair. Really enjoyed it.